I used to think a thief had to wear a hood, sneak through a window at midnight. In Detroit, I learned a chilling truth. Some thieves walk through your front door, pour tea into your cup, call you mom, and steal your entire house with nothing but a piece of paper. That morning, standing on the porch of my home in Rosedale Park, I received a thick envelope from the Wayne County Register of Deeds. I laughed until I saw the bold words, "New owner, Candace Miller." Candace, my daughter-in-law. The date on the document matched the exact day I was on oxygen in the hospital. They said I had signed it. Funny, on that day, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold a spoon. 3 days later, I walked into Wayne County Court. When the screen showed my hospital discharge papers and the bank's security footage, the courtroom fell so silent you could hear a pin drop. In that moment, I realized they hadn't just meant to take my house. They wanted to take my name, my voice, and the boundaries I had loosened for far too long. If you're new to Margaret's stories, hit subscribe so you won't miss the real-life stories told through the voices of those who lived them. And if you've ever been betrayed over money or property, leave a comment. When did you first realize the signs? The question is, what could a 70-year-old woman like me possibly do to turn the tables, using the very same papers they used to steal my home? Follow me to the next part. Autumn in Detroit has a kind of light that makes even the oldest rooftops glimmer like they've just been freshly painted. I had lived in that brown brick house on Outer Drive West for nearly half a century. The front door was painted teal, the windowsill held pots of red geraniums, and a seashell wind chime I'd bought at Belle Isle long ago swayed with every breeze. Each morning, I brewed cinnamon tea, opened the kitchen window so sunlight could pour across the scratched wooden table, and listen to the rustle of leaves outside like an old, familiar melody. The house wasn't large, but it contained an entire life. In the corner of the living room hung a black and white wedding photo of my husband and me. He'd been gone a long time now, and since then, I'd learned to talk to the house as if it were a friend. "Hey, don't leak again under that sink. It's cold tonight. Let me tuck another blanket over you." Some people would laugh, but anyone who's lived alone long enough understands a home has a soul. My son Darius had once been my pride. Clever hands, a sharp mind. But life rarely walks in a straight line. After a failed business venture, Darius sank into debt. I could see it in the way he avoided my eyes, always saying on the phone, "Don't worry, Mom, I've got it." I wanted to believe him, the way mothers always want to believe. 4 years ago, Darius brought home Candace, a woman whose voice was as sweet as molasses. She called me Mom from the first dinner, rolled up her sleeves to wash dishes, and said my beef stew felt like hugging the whole winter in one bite. I know how to cook, and I also know how to listen. Behind her compliments were those casual little lines about family financial structure, asset optimization, and so you won't have to stress, let us handle the paperwork for you. I wasn't stupid. But some days my knees ached like temple drums, my hands trembled when I held a pen, and the tiny letters on bank mail blurred together. Candace offered to install the bank app on my phone to remind you of the bill schedule. I told her I didn't pay bills by phone. I preferred walking to the credit union at the corner, chatting with the same teller about her kids, walking on my own 2 feet, seeing with my own eyes, hearing with my own ears. That was how I verified the world. Last month, I was hospitalized for shortness of breath. Old age comes like an uninvited guest. It knocks at midnight and says, "I'll be staying a while." Darius drove me to Detroit Receiving Hospital. Candace handled the forms, telling me to rest easy. And I did, because what else could I do surrounded by wires and beeping monitors? Lying there staring at the ceiling tiles, I thought about my brown brick house and reminded myself, don't forget to lock the ledger after paying the gas bill. Habit is the rope that keeps you from drifting away. When I returned home, the porch was spotless. Too spotless. Candace said she'd hired cleaners so you wouldn't have to fuss. Sometimes kindness is too loud. I thanked her, then checked every lock myself. Gate, front door, back door, basement hatch. Everything was in its place, calm as a winter day after a storm. Then the mail arrived. The mailman in our neighborhood was a cheerful man who wore the same brown knit hat year-round. That morning he waved, "Beautiful day, Ms. Maver." "Beautiful like a $10 bill just ironed flat," I said. We laughed. I took the stack of envelopes, leaned on the railing, and sorted through them. The electric bill, I knew the paper color. The grocery flyer, I knew the cheap ink smell. But the thick envelope was unfamiliar. The Wayne County Register of Deeds seal gleamed like a vow before God. I tore it open. It said, ownership records have been updated, that the new owner is Candace Miller. I read it again and again, then reached for my reading glasses. The letter listed dates, document numbers, notarized signatures, and a golden raised seal. My cinnamon tea went cold in an instant. I didn't scream. Old people rarely do. We sit and listen to our heartbeat until we can tell which thump is fear and which is fury. I called Darius. The phone rang long, then stopped. I texted, "Come home." Now I wiped the table, washed the cup, and laid the letter on a clean cloth. Then I opened my black notebook, the one where I keep every important paper. The original deed, home insurance, tax receipts, and my signature card from the credit union. I may not be a lawyer, but I know my own handwriting. And I knew the date they claimed I'd signed, the very day I'd been breathing through an oxygen tube in the hospital. When Darius came home, he avoided looking at the letter. I didn't mince words. "You took my house? On paper?" He swallowed hard. Candace called right then, her voice smooth as honey. "Mom, we just restructured things to help optimize." I hung up mid-sentence. I didn't need sweet talk. I needed truth. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote 3 lines. Go to the hospital for discharge records with exact timestamps. Go to the credit union for signature sample and confirmation I wasn't there. Go to Wayne County Register of Deeds for full transfer history. The next morning, Detroit was cold but bright. I put on my gray wool coat, wrapped a burnt orange scarf, grabbed my canvas bag, an old blue ink pen. Step 1, the hospital. The young nurse looked at me with knowing eyes. When I explained, she said, "Don't worry, ma'am. We keep everything." She printed it out. Admitted 8:30 a.m., discharged 4:20 p.m., that same day, stamped and sealed. I looked at the fresh ink and felt my heartbeat steady again. Step 2, the credit union on Grand River Avenue. The familiar teller smiled wide. "Haven't seen you in a while. My mom keeps asking where you've been." I told her the story, calm as if describing soup that turned out a little too salty. She printed my signature sample and transaction log. "You weren't here that day." And we never notarize real estate documents. I thanked her, placed my hand on the smooth wooden counter polished by decades of hands, and whispered to myself, "All right, Amelia." One step at a time. In the restroom mirror, I looked at my hands, brown spotted from the sun. They say age means slowing down. To me, age means choosing the right pace. When you can't be fast anymore, you start being precise. If the signature on those papers wasn't mine, then whose pen touched the page? And why did that notary seal look brand new, never once worn down? Remember the letter A in my name. It dips too deep, like an anchor sinking to the riverbed. That A wasn't mine. In a moment, when we reach the Register of Deeds office, you'll see why a single stroke of ink can drag an entire case out of the mud. Stay with me. I'll show you how a 70-year-old woman used the same papers they stole her house with to take it all back. Step 3, Wayne County Register of Deeds. Government buildings always smell of new paper, cold brick, and thin hope. I took a number, waited, listened to the click of heels on tile, steady as a metronome. When it was my turn, the clerk examined my paperwork, typed a few keys. "Here," she said, turning the screen toward me. A quit-claim deed transferring ownership from Amelia Maver to Candace Miller, with a shaky Amelia signature and a notary stamp from someone I'd never heard of. I looked at that scrawl, a pulled too low, M's crawling like frightened ants. Not mine. I took a deep breath. "Could you print me a stamped copy?" She nodded. "And where's this notary registered?" She searched again, frowned. "That's odd. This name doesn't appear on the state's list of licensed notaries." Silence, spreading like ink bleeding through paper. I slipped the copies into my bag and stepped into Detroit's noon sunlight. The Guardian building gleamed amber in the distance like a honeycomb tower. On the courthouse steps, I gripped my bag strap tight. On the way home, wind stung my face, eyes watering, but not from tears. For the first time, I saw clearly. Every person, every word, every habit I'd let slide. And the path ahead? A lawyer. I called Patrice Coleman, the girl from my old Bible study group, now a real estate attorney. "Sweetheart," I said, "they took my house on paper. I have the hospital record, my signature sample, and a questionable notary seal." Patrice replied, "Come to my office this afternoon. Bring everything. And from now on, don't sign anything, don't talk to Candace unless I'm there." That afternoon in her office, sunlight brushed the spines of thick law books. Patrice flipped through my file like a skilled chef tasting soup and knowing exactly what it needs. "This is forged signature and unlawful notarization," she said. "We'll file a motion for a temporary restraining order against any property transaction and request the bank's surveillance footage showing Candace, withdrawing roughly $120,000. I nodded. "Patrice, what do you think the judge will say when he sees my discharge record, the same day I supposedly signed over my home?" Patrice smiled, not mockingly, but with the calm of someone who's fought many battles. "I think, Ms. Amelia, he'll go quiet." And so, before the sun dipped behind the trees on Outer Drive, a 70-year-old woman lit the kitchen lamp, laid her evidence folder on the table, and whispered to her house, "My dear friend, I'm home. Tomorrow we fight." The next morning, Patrice Coleman and I stood before the Wayne County Register of Deeds. Detroit's air was crisp. Sunlight gilded the red bricks of the administrative building, turning the windows golden. Patrice rested her hand lightly on my elbow. "Mrs. Amelia," she said, "today we don't argue. We collect data inside." The smell of fresh paper and printer ink greeted us like a ritual. Patrice went straight to the counter, voice calm but commanding. "We're filing a request for the complete chain of title for property number. Here, along with the notary file, details of the notary's commission, submission timestamp, and, if available, the original signature scan." The young clerk, her badge read J. Alvarez, typed briskly, "Yes, we can print the chain of title right away." The original signature image is stored in the digital archive. That might take a few minutes. I folded my hands before me, steady as a deep river. 12 minutes later, Alvarez laid a stack of papers on the counter. "Extract of ownership history. My husband and I bought the house decades ago. Later, it was in my name alone. Quitclaim deed, transferring the property from Amelia Maver to Candace Miller. Notary seal under an unfamiliar name. Submission time, 2:18 p.m., the exact hour I had been lying in a hospital bed." Patrice leaned in, eyes sharp as blades slicing bread. "Mrs. Amelia, look at this signature." I looked closely. The A dipped too deep, but in a different way, clumsy, as if someone had tried to mimic my hand without understanding its rhythm. The M letters were glued together. The V trembled like drawn by an impatient child. "This isn't mine," I said, each word falling heavy on the desk. Patrice smiled faintly. "Now for the fun part. We'll request an affidavit confirming that this notary was not in the state's authorized list at the time of stamping, and we'll need the system log, who logged in, from which device, and when Alvarez hesitated, then called inside. A middle-aged man in a buttoned shirt appeared. Mr. Hargrove, head of records. He reviewed the file, flipped a few pages, and nodded. We can issue a written statement confirming that this name did not appear among Michigan's commissioned notaries on that date. As for the system log, we'll need a formal attorney request. Patrice pulled out a ready form. Here it is, I breathed evenly. I wasn't fast anymore, but I was steady, and at my age, steady was a kind of victory. We left the counter and sat on the last bench under the skylight, waiting for the stamped documents. Sunlight poured through the glass dome. Dust particles spun like a swarm of gentle insects. Then I heard the sound of heels stopping behind me. Mom, Amelia. Candace. She appeared in a cream coat, silk scarf draped loosely, her perfume sweet with vanilla. Beside her stood a man I'd never seen, slicked back hair, smile sharp as a knife. Marcus Vance. We heard you came here, Candace began softly. Why didn't you tell us? We just wanted to optimize the ownership structure, that's all. Patrice rose smoothly, her voice velvet over steel. Do not speak to my client without me present. And don't dress forgery in fancy language. Candace's eyes flickered toward Patrice, then back to me, her tone melting into feigned pity. Mom, I signed for you because your hands were shaking. I only wanted to help. I looked straight into her eyes. You shouldn't borrow my hand to sign away my house. Marcus stepped in, sliding a business card onto the bench. I'm just an internal transfer consultant. The transaction was legal, properly notarized. Patrice lifted the card between two fingers as if it were something unclean. The notarization is invalid. The state has no record of that notary, and we have proof Mrs. Amelia was hospitalized exactly when that signature was made. Would you like to commit perjury on record? The air thickened. Candace stepped back half a pace. Marcus forced a grin. Must be an administrative mix-up. Patrice leaned toward me and whispered, Time to speed up. I thought of my kitchen shelf, the way I arranged my spices, salt cloves, pepper far, cinnamon in the middle. People laugh at habits like that. But it was habit that told me something was out of place. My name, placed on a document where it didn't belong. If the notary was fake, then where did the seal come from? Who logged into the system at 2:18 p.m. while I was breathing through tubes? Remember the clock on the Register of Deeds wall? The second hand ticking like heels on tile. When it hits 12, we'll have 3 confirmations. No valid notary, a suspicious submission time, and handwriting that isn't mine. Stay with me. In the next moment, the optimizer will trip on his own jargon. Alvarez returned with 3 sheets. Verification. The named notary was not in the Michigan authorized list on the stated date. Submission log. The deed was uploaded from kiosk number 3 using a temporary login issued during system maintenance. High-resolution scan of the signature. Patrice arched an eyebrow. Temporary login during maintenance? Mr. Hargrove explained. Whenever the system updates, technicians create temporary accounts for data entry assistance from the filing party. Normally, those are pre-registered users. This seems to be an exception. Patrice turned to Marcus. You said it followed procedure? Marcus swallowed. Let's not make this bigger than it is. If Mrs. Amelia's upset, we can adjust the records. I cut in, firm. By adjust, you mean return the house. Candace clenched her fist, irritation flashing through her smile. Mom, you're overreacting. Patrice replied softly, The law doesn't speak of overreaction or underreaction. It speaks of evidence. Her phone buzzed. She opened it and placed it on the desk, an email glowing on the screen. It was the hospital's response confirming my admission and discharge times with the coordinator's digital signature. That's piece number 4, Patrice said. Now, on to the bank. We left the building. On the steps, the wind whipped up, scattering a handful of red maple leaves. I paused, touching the cold stone railing. Marcus called from below, voice honeyed and sly. Mrs. Amelia, have you ever heard of a reverse mortgage? Lots of seniors in Detroit choose that. It might suit you better than clinging to an old house. I looked at him and saw the tactic. Confuse the elderly, bury them in fine print, wear them down till they surrender. "I know the difference between living in my home and being homeless," I said. "I choose home." Patrice smiled. "That line belongs in our closing statement." At the bank branch where Candace had withdrawn about $120,000, we filed the formal request for security footage. The manager, Mr. Green, polite and composed, said, "We'll need a subpoena or official order, but off the record, I can confirm that day and hour, 2 individuals, a man and a woman, appeared at the teller window presenting a power of attorney in the name of Amelia Maver." "Perfect," Patrice said. "The subpoena's on its way." I asked quietly, "Does the camera show their faces?" He nodded. "Clear as day." That evening, in my living room, I laid all the documents on the table: the chain of title, the invalid notary confirmation, the submission log, the signature scan, the hospital record, and the banknote, each page aligned perfectly, like a choir ready to sing. I called Darius. He arrived looking hollow, guilt carving shadows on his face. He stared at the papers, breathing heavily. "Mom, I didn't think it'd go this far. Candace said it was just a name on paper, that you'd still live there." I looked up. "You just said the words men like Marcus love most. Just a name on paper. Do you know what that name is, son? It's the soul of the house. Without it, I'm nobody, even in my own home." Darius sat down, hands over his face. I didn't comfort him. I let silence do its work. Patrice texted, "Filing the emergency injunction first thing in the morning. Also drafting your affidavit describing your tremors, shortness of breath, and where you were at the recorded signing time." I replied, "Ready?" I turned off the kitchen light and headed toward the stairs. In the hallway mirror, I saw a 70-year-old woman whose eyes held no tears left to shed, only a small, steady flame. The house creaked softly, as if answering back. "My dear friend," I whispered, "tomorrow we go to court." Morning in Detroit wore a thin veil of mist. Patrice Coleman and I passed through security at the Wayne County Circuit Court. The corridor stretched long. Fluorescent lights hummed. The scents of polished wood and old paper mingled like a strange perfume. On the benches, people waiting for later hearings stared down at their phones. Only I looked up at the ceiling, listening to the steady footsteps of the officers. "Remember, Mrs. Amelia," Patrice murmured, "we have one objective today, a temporary restraining order to freeze all transactions involving the house. No moral debates. We speak in evidence." The courtroom wasn't large. Candace Miller sat on the opposite bench, neatly dressed, hair in a high bun, wearing a thin smile, as if attending a family counseling session. Beside her was Marcus Vance, dark suit, dark tie, unblinking eyes. Darius sat behind them, head bowed. The judge entered. His eyes were tired but clear, the kind that had seen too many property disputes to know what was true tragedy and what was theater. He reviewed the file, nodded to the clerk. Patrice stood, her voice steady and precise. "Your Honor, we request a temporary restraining order on the Rosedale Park property on the following grounds. 1. The signature on the quitclaim deed does not match Ms. Amelia Maver's signature card. 2. The notary seal belongs to an individual not listed in the state's notary registry at the time of stamping. 3. The filing timestamp coincides exactly with the period my client was hospitalized, as certified. 4. Approximately $120,000 was withdrawn from a mortgage line initiated after the ownership name change. We are awaiting bank video confirmation. Opposing counsel, a gray-haired man, rose with a dry cough. Your Honor, this is a mere procedural mix-up. My client, Ms. Candace, had verbal authorization from her mother-in-law to arrange the paperwork. As for the notary, likely a data update error. In any event, Ms. Amelia remains in the home. There is no risk of irreparable harm. Patrice didn't smile, but light glinted at the corner of her eye. Ownership documents are not matters of verbal authorization. The irreparable harm is precisely the loss of one's name on title, bringing risk of transfer, encumbrance, or dissipation. We present a 4-piece evidence set. She laid a neatly tabbed packet on the lectern. Hospital certification, admission and discharge times, signature card from the credit union, confirmation of no valid notary on the stated date, filing log showing a temporary account used during a maintenance window. The judge flipped through. His pen paused at temporary account. This is irregular. He turned to the defense. Response? The gray-haired lawyer adjusted his glasses. We don't yet have information, Your Honor. But there was surely no ill intent, Patrice. Additionally, we have served a subpoena on the bank for the withdrawal footage. The branch manager has preliminarily confirmed 2 individuals present, one male accompanying Ms. Candace, presenting a power of attorney in the name of Amelia Maver. We will submit the video upon receipt. The judge closed the file and looked at me. Mrs. Amelia, anything to add, briefly? I stood, hand on my cane. Your Honor, there are things we old folks do slowly. But there's one thing we do very surely. We remember the way home. They say I signed. That day, my hands couldn't even hold a spoon. I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for my name to return to where it belongs. The courtroom fell silent for a beat, lingering the emotion and a promised payoff. People say courts are cold. To me, a court is like a mother's kitchen. Everything must be measured right. Too much salt, it's briny. Too little, it's bland. Evidence is the same, dear listeners. It's either right or it isn't. Question to hold the audience before the peak. If the notary doesn't exist, who issued that temporary account? Who used it? And why did it land exactly when I was on oxygen? And when the bank video plays, what faces will stare straight into the lens? Visual anchor. Remember my blue ink pen and the A in my name that drops like an anchor. One more video frame, and that anchor will catch on the riverbed and haul the whole ship of truth to the surface. Stay with me. In the next moment, this room will hear its second hush. The judge nodded, voice low. The court grants the temporary restraining order. Neither party may transfer, encumber, or otherwise alter title to the home until further order. The court also orders the bank to provide video pursuant to subpoena. We will reconvene as soon as the footage is available. Opposing counsel offered a feeble protest. Your Honor. Decided. The gavel struck once, as firm as a period at the end of a line. Outside the courtroom, Candace strode toward me, voice lowered, sweet as dark sugar. Mother, you're making things hard for me in front of people. I didn't stop. No. I'm making things clear in front of the law. Marcus whispered to his lawyer, eyes cutting toward me. All calculation. On the courthouse steps, Darius caught up, breathless. Mom, I'm sorry. I messed up. I thought it was just putting the name in for convenience. I looked at my son. Putting a name in is standing in someone's place. And when it collapses, who stands to take the blame? The mother Darius sagged like a coat soaked through by rain. I wanted to raise a hand to him, but I couldn't yet. Forgiveness has an order. First, things must be put back where they belong. Patrice took a call, then held the phone for me to hear. The bank says the video will be ready within 24 hours. The frames are quite clear. I nodded. Good. Send my sworn statement with the doctor's note about the tremors, so they won't say I forgot. That afternoon, we stopped at the Guardian building to execute the affidavit. The notary office was bright. The board behind the desk listed the names of valid notaries. Patrice pointed. The name from Candace's filing isn't here, and not in the state database either. I signed my name slowly, every familiar stroke, the A unhurried, the anchor just deep enough. See? I whispered to steady myself. My name is still here. Night fell, and the house was quiet. I clicked on the kitchen light and poured tea. On the porch, the street lamp dyed the maple leaves in antique bronze. I set the papers on the table like laying out supper. Evidence in the center, notes alongside, blue ink pen cocked across the top. I called Miss Alvarez at the Register of Deeds, just to say thank you. She sounded surprised. "You don't need to thank me, ma'am. You just need to keep going." My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Don't drag me into this. I only did what Marcus said." No name. But I'm old enough to recognize the kind of person who texts with a trembling hand. I forwarded it to Patrice. She replied, "Another crack." Next morning, Patrice messaged, "Supplemental hearing moved up. Court wants to view the video as soon as it arrives." I put on my wool coat, wrapped my scarf, and took my blue ink pen like a ritual. On the way to court, we passed the Renaissance Center, those glass towers standing like mirrors to the bright sky. I thought, this city has stood up more times than I can count. So have I. In the courtroom, a screen was rolled down. A staffer set a small drive on the table, tested it. The judge sat upright, fingers interlaced. "All right," he said. "Let's watch." I gripped my cane. Candace leaned slightly forward. Marcus braced his elbows on his knees, chin jutting like a cat ready to pounce. Darius swallowed. Light washed the blank screen a cool blue. Then the frame flickered on. A bank teller window appeared. Date and time in the corner. A woman with a high bun, cream coat, stepped into frame. Beside her, a man with slicked-back hair glanced around as if checking for cameras. They placed a stack of papers on the counter. I noticed my heartbeat no longer raced. It was steady. Very steady. "Pause there," the judge said. "Zoom in." The image enlarged, clear enough to see threads at a cuff. The woman raised her face. Her features were unmistakable. Candace. Beside her, the man smirked, cocking his head toward the lens as if in greeting. Marcus. Patrice set her hand on the table's edge, voice low and firm. "Your Honor, these are the two individuals who presented a power of attorney in the name of Amelia Maver to withdraw funds from the loan created after the title change." Opposing counsel sprang up. "Objection!" "Sit," the judge said, not loud, but final. I didn't look at Candace. I looked at my name printed on the paper in the video, then at the hand beneath it that was not mine. In my head, I heard a gavel, striking in time with the court's. "At the next hearing," the judge said, "we'll hear explanations." For now, the TRO remains in effect. The court notes the likelihood of serious forgery. Outside, the wind hit harder. Marcus no longer met my eyes. He stared at the ground, occasionally flicking a glance at Candace, as if testing the temperature of water about to boil over. Darius came close, voice hoarse. "Mom, please let me talk with you in private tonight." I nodded. Tonight, 7 o'clock. In the kitchen, I knew that tonight another truth would need to be brought up, not from paper, from my son. That evening, the only light in my kitchen was the soft yellow lamp over the wooden table. The cinnamon tea steamed. The old wall calendar was marked in blue ink for my hospital days, the court dates, and a red circle around one word, truth, today. Darius arrived at exactly 7. He stood in the doorway like a lost boy. I pulled out a chair and pointed, "Sit, speak." He looked down at his calloused hands. "Mom, I owe Marcus money." High interest. I lost money in business, then kept rolling it over on cards, then took a hard loan. Candace said there was a way to temporarily hold title, take out a short-term mortgage, then transfer it back to you. They promised at most 3 months. I poured tea and waited. Darius went on, exhausted. Marcus said he had a private notary, fast. I asked if it was legal, and he said, "Legality is what happens in court. Real life needs speed." The day you were in the hospital, Candace said it was a good time because you were tied up and wouldn't need to go to the bank. I knew they were signing for you. I knew, but I told myself we were just borrowing your name. Then we'd withdraw the money to pay interest, and a few weeks later, put the title back. I thought once it was done, It'd be done. But the interest ate me alive. I sank deeper and deeper. I set the cup down. Porcelain kissing wood, the faintest sound. And the power of attorney in my name? Darius shut his eyes. Marcus prepared it. Candace, signed. I felt a string inside my chest, pulled taut like a violin. Not to play a sad song, to hold pitch. Tonight, I said, you bring everything. Texts, emails, appointment logs, anything tied to Marcus and Candace. Phone, computer. Tomorrow, Patrice will file to preserve data and request location extraction, not just yours. Theirs. Darius nodded like a man with nothing left to hide. I'll do it. The next morning, Patrice Coleman's office was bright with Detroit's icy sunlight. On the desk lay Darius's phone, an old laptop, and crumpled statements. Patrice slipped on thin gloves and connected the imaging device. We won't dig deep, she said, just a forensic backup, so when the court signs off, the data is pristine. I sat opposite, arms around my file bag. Patrice opened the screen and scrolled quickly through messages. Here. A text from Marcus. Kiosk tomorrow, 2 p.m. I've got a temp account. A text from Candace. She's in the hospital. Everything will be smooth. A text from Darius. How much longer till it's done? Mom's asking. Marcus. Shut it. Once the name is on paper, it's done. Patrice glanced up at me. I didn't pant. I counted 1, 2, 3, and nodded. Good. Take it. She checked the calendar entries. The dates and times matched the filing log at the Register of Deeds. She gave a thin smile. Clever cheats often forget to change the most obvious thing, time. We went to Wayne County Court with a thick motion, a preservation order with 3 prongs. Require the bank to retain all original camera footage and metadata. Require the Register of Deeds to provide the full access logs for the temporary account. Require Candace and Marcus to surrender personal phones and computers and consent to extraction of location data, cell tower and GPS Google timeline for the relevant window. In the courtroom, opposing counsel protested, "An invasion of privacy." Patrice set it down as gently as a teacup. Privacy doesn't cover the footprints of a crime. We're only seeking time-bound data relevant to the events. The judge tapped his pen on the packet, weighing it like a precious item. Mrs. Amelia, anything to add? I stood. Your Honor, my son has told the truth. The rest, let the data finish saying. The judge leaned back. Defense? The gray-haired lawyer faltered, looking to Candace. She didn't look back, only clenched her purse strap. Marcus was unnervingly placid, like a man watching a chessboard. He believes he's already 3 moves ahead on. I looked at that faint curl of his lip and thought, some smiles are just cracks in the glaze. The judge nodded. The court is inclined to grant, but before I sign, I want the exact scope of data defined. Patrice laid it out quickly, clearly. A 7-day window around the transaction date, cell site location, and GPS history, limited to trips to the Register of Deeds and the bank. Messages and emails containing the keywords deed, notary, kiosk, authorization, reverse mortgage, and call logs among the 3. Candace, Marcus, Darius during that period. The judge nodded. Granted. In my kitchen, I line up spices by habit. In the courtroom, Patrice lines up data by law. Get the spices right, the dish sings. Get the data right, justice takes root. When the location pings open, whose phone will sit still at exactly 2:18 inside the Register of Deeds? And who will leave a bright trail like a running stitch from the parking lot straight into the bank? Picture Detroit at night, a scatter of lights. We only need to connect 3, Register of Deeds, the bank, and my house. Connect them, and an arrow appears. And whom does that arrow point to? Stay with me. In a moment, the judge's pen will touch down, and the ink will speak for me. The judge bent over and signed. The preservation order was issued. He looked up. Effective immediately. Defendants must surrender devices within 24 hours. The bank and Register of Deeds must produce data under subpoena within 2 days. Opposing counsel raised a hand. Your Honor, my client, Miss Candace, has sensitive personal content. Judge, the court limits collection to a narrow scope. All data outside scope will be sealed, but the court will not look away from truth for fear of embarrassment. Out in the hall, Candace suddenly turned, staring straight at Darius. You told her everything, didn't you? Darius didn't flinch. Yeah. She pressed her lips together, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. By the time this is over, do you think she'll still have a house? I stepped forward, standing between them. If a house only exists when your name sits on its paper, then it was never your house. It was your mine. Marcus buttoned his coat and offered a polite passerby's smile. Mrs. Amelia, you're tough, but everything has a price. Sometimes settling now is the softest deal you'll get. Patrice stood at my side, not a step back. The only price here is truth. And we're buying it with original data. The next day, Mr. Green from the bank called. We received the subpoena. We've cloned the original footage and access logs. One oddity, the account executing the transaction required two-factor authentication via a phone number not registered to Ms. Amelia. Patrice, which number? He read the digits. I knew the last 4. I wasn't surprised. Candace had used that number to call an Uber from my house. That afternoon, the Register of Deeds sent the logs. The temporary account logged in from kiosk number 3, internal IP. At 2:18 p.m., with the one-time code entered by filing assistant attached, was a grainy hallway camera still, a cream-colored coat slipping past the frame. By evening, Candace had not surrendered her phone. Her lawyer emailed, "My client's device is lost." Patrice replied with a single line, "The court will draw adverse inference." Good luck Marcus did turn in a phone, clean as if fresh from the box. Forensics flagged a factory reset a few hours before surrender. Patrice smiled razor-thin. Fingerprints are most visible where something is missing. That night, Darius and I sat in the kitchen. He stared into his teacup like answers might be written at the bottom. Mom, what can I even say now? I spoke slowly. You'll do. Not say. Tomorrow you'll go and give a full sworn statement to the court. You'll tell them about the money, the interest, the arrangement, and you'll say the most important sentence, "My mother never consented." Darius nodded, eyes red. I'll do it. I stood and turned off the kitchen light. In the dark, I heard the house breathe. Not tired, lighter, as if those brown brick walls were shedding a thin film that had clung for years, the dust of fear, of deference, of silence. Tomorrow, the data would begin to speak, and when data speaks, liars fall quiet. Detroit's morning was as clear as freshly wiped glass. We returned to the Wayne County Circuit Court. A large monitor sat on the table. The technician had already plugged in the drive and opened the forensics software. Standing beside me, Patrice Coleman whispered, "Today, you won't need to say much. The map will speak for you." Across the aisle, Candace came in wearing that familiar cream coat, eyes glued to her phone. Marcus followed, suit pressed as if it had never wrinkled. Darius sat in the last row, fingers laced tight, as if holding his hands to keep them from trembling. The judge surveyed the room and nodded to the technician. "Let's begin." The screen lit up. A map of Detroit appeared, roads veining a gray canvas. The technician zoomed into downtown. "Your Honor," he said, "this is court-ordered cell site and GPS data from the 7-day window around the event. Red is the device tied to Candace Miller's number. Blue is the device tied to Marcus Vance. Yellow is the device tied to Darius Maver." He moved the cursor. A red dot traveled along Grand River Avenue, turned toward the Register of Deeds. Elsewhere, a blue dot left a parking lot and converged at the same time. At 2:18 p.m., the technician said, both red and blue register at kiosk number 3. The judge leaned in, fingers interlaced. Proceed? The map shifted. Red and blue left the admin building, crossed a few blocks, and stopped at the bank branch. In the corner, the bank video we'd watched in the prior hearing played in a small frame, running in sync with the map like two strings plucked to the same rhythm. This is the sequence, the technician summarized, from the Register of Deeds to the bank, over 43 minutes. Roughly 12 minutes at the kiosk, 9 in transit, 22 in the bank. Patrice rose. And this is supplemental evidence. She submitted a printed page, the Register of Deeds internal log showing the temporary account operated by a filing assistant signed MV, the initials of Marcus Vance. Across the aisle, Marcus arched a brow, smirking. Coincidence. Detroit's full of Michael Vincents, Mary Valdez's. Patrice didn't look at him. But there's only one person standing next to Candace in the video, and only one person who texted, "Kiosk at 2, I've got the temp account," on Darius's phone. The judge turned to the defense. Explanation? The gray-haired attorney cleared his throat. Your Honor, that could be a third-party filing facilitator. My clients don't grasp the technical protocols. They were merely guided. Stop, the judge said. Quiet, but enough. Technical protocols don't permit unauthorized personnel to use maintenance window accounts. Even if they did, transferring title for someone hospitalized still requires a real signature. Patrice asked to present signature comparison. The screen split. On the left, my signature card from the credit union. On the right, the quitclaim deed signature. Analytical overlays appeared, slant, pause rhythm, pressure. Preliminary analysis, said the court-appointed handwriting examiner from the state lab, indicates two different writers. In particular, the downstroke of the A on the right is excessively deep and lacks the characteristic pause. The M-V junction is tugged as by an imitator Candace inhaled, light but audible. She twisted her ring, eyes drifting somewhere between the two panes, as if searching for an escape route through glass. Patrice turned to Darius. Do you wish to address the purpose of the loan for the court? Darius stood, voice low and dry. I borrowed to pay interest on interest. I thought I could turn it around in 3 months. I was wrong. The judge asked, Did you know the notarization was fraudulent? I shut my eyes, Darius said, and that was my fault. Across the aisle, Marcus clicked his tongue. Everyone's making this big. People sign on behalf all the time. Elderly hands shake. It's hard to sign, so a convenience authorization. Patrice cut in. Your language trembles like your hand, Mr. Vance. The room buzzed, then went still as the judge swept the gallery with his eyes. In my kitchen, my spice map keeps me from seasoning wrong. In court, the location map keeps the court from seasoning justice wrong. What do you see? 3 points of light, Register of Deeds, the bank, and their phones, joined into an arrow. If that arrow runs straight through 2 doors, administrative and banking, who's the guide? And when the court asks, who issued the temp account, which name will shatter like glass? Hold on to the A downstroke and the red-blue dots on the map. 1 letter, 2 lights, and a ticking timestamp. 1 more small piece and the lock will click. Stay with me. Next, the one who thought he controlled the board will be the first to drop his king. When the screen dimmed, the judge leaned back, finding his breath. He turned to the technician. Give me the bank video metadata. A panel popped up. Time code, camera ID, retrieval node, and crucially, the phone number used for 2-factor authentication on the withdrawal. Patrice handed up the bank's written confirmation. That number isn't mine. Branch manager Mr. Green noted an additional contact number provided at the counter by the customer. And who is the customer here? The judge asked. Patrice pointed to the frozen frame. Candace speaking with the teller, Marcus angled toward the lens, lips pressed in a half-smile. Opposing counsel jumped up. Objection. The judge waved him down. Noted. The court has seen enough. Candace turned to Marcus and whispered urgently. Her lips formed. You said it was clean. Marcus lowered his voice. Clean, without location data. Patrice requested to play a short audio clip, a voice message Marcus had sent Darius 3 days before the event, extracted from the forensic backup. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock, kiosk 3. I'll secure the temp account. At the bank, just say verbal authorization. Those folks only care about moving things along. The room thrummed like a plucked wire. The judge nodded, voice dropping. The court notes potential criminal conduct, forged signature, unlawful notarization, misuse of temporary credentials in a public process. The court will refer relevant materials to the county prosecutor's investigative unit. Meanwhile, the TRO is extended, and the court encourages parties to consider a civil remedy to repair the harm while the criminal inquiry proceeds. The gray-haired lawyer exhaled and leaned toward Candace. Her face was cracking. For the first time, I saw real fear, not performance. Marcus tried to hold his courteous smile, but his jaw set like stone. Outside, the cold wind lashed the stone steps. Darius came to me, voice rough. Mom, I'll sign whatever. I'll answer every question. I gave a small nod. Yes, you'll pay what's yours. What's mine stays with me. Patrice took a call and put it on speaker. The Register of Deeds with an addendum. We found a failed login attempt at 2:17:43 p.m. from a mobile device, browser-based. The IP matches the data plan registered to Candace. Patrice lifted an eyebrow at me. I didn't smile. I placed my hand on the cold stone rail and felt the chill rise into my bones. Right place, I said. Time for the lock to spring. That afternoon we sat in Patrice's office. She spread the file like a treasure map, marking the turns in red: Register of Deeds, bank, texts, location, metadata, failed login log. Tomorrow, she said, I'll send a civil settlement proposal. Rescind the quitclaim deed. Return all withdrawn funds with interest and fees to you. Commit in writing not to interfere with your property again. Deliver a public apology on the record. If they won't sign, we continue. The criminal referral is already live. I looked out the window. Detroit had turned the color of old bronze. I thought of my kitchen, the seashell chime, the red geraniums along the sill. A house isn't just brick and wood. It's the thing that calls your name when you're tired. I laid my hand over my heart and felt the steady beat. That night, I went home and switched on the kitchen light. I placed my blue ink pen on the tablecloth, straight as a vow. Candace and Marcus may change their story, scrub logs, or lose a phone. But the map is drawn. The arrow points. Tomorrow I'll tell the court one very short sentence. Your Honor, my name will return to where it belongs. Detroit's morning was thick, like a cup of coffee forgotten on the stove. Patrice Coleman and I entered a small conference room behind the Wayne County Circuit Court. A long table, paper cups of water, fluorescent light pouring straight down, like a reminder, today there's no room for halfway. Across from us sat Candace Miller, her tired face wrapped in a thin layer of makeup. Her gray-haired lawyer sat beside her, hand resting on a file. Marcus Vance arrived late, sharp suit, cologne biting like ginger, a smile already pasted on. Patrice began, her voice as straight as chalk across a blackboard. Our civil settlement proposal has 4 terms. 1. Annul the quitclaim deed. 2. Return all withdrawn funds plus accrued interest and fees. 3. Sign a written pledge never again to interfere with Mrs. Amelia Maver's property. 4. Issue a public apology before the court to be entered into record. Otherwise, we proceed, criminal inquiry continues, and civil litigation follows through. The lawyer tapped his pen. We're willing to discuss, but please note, my clients do not admit wrongdoing. Patrice nodded. That's your right. Evidence is ours. Candace tried a thin smile. Mother Amelia, I just want to make things right. The house is still yours. I made a mistake. I looked at the ceiling lights reflecting off her lawyer's glasses. You didn't slip, child. You chose. Marcus leaned back, hands steepled, voice smooth as rubber. No one wants you to suffer, ma'am. I propose a win-win. Keep the loan active, we'll repay the interest in installments, and in exchange you sign confirming you gave verbal authorization due to health. Patrice didn't even blink. You're proposing to retro-legalize a forgery. The answer is no. The gray-haired lawyer interjected. All right, let's talk numbers. The total repayment? Patrice slid over a spreadsheet. Approximately $120,000 withdrawn, plus interest and costs, totaling $136,000. Lump sum within 30 days of signing. Late payments incur statutory interest. Candace drew a sharp breath. Marcus frowned. That figure's not realistic. Patrice. And stealing a 70-year-old woman's home on paper is? The air stretched tight, like an overtuned string. The lawyer glanced at the file, then murmured, If we accept the first 3 terms but omit the public apology, would— Patrice shook her head. No, the apology isn't humiliation. It's rehabilitation. A court clerk knocked, handed in a paper, confirmation of the follow-up hearing at 11:50 a.m. Time was running out. In the hallway, Candace tugged my sleeve. Mother, if I transfer all the money, can I be forgiven? I looked at the faint powder lines on her face, no longer glowing, only dusty. Forgiveness is God's business. Putting things back where they belong is yours. Marcus approached, smile losing some of its polish. Mrs. Amelia, come on! I respect you. Everyone slips up. Sign here. He slid a partial reimbursement agreement across the table. And everything smooths out. I pushed the paper back like a cracked plate. I don't eat smooth. I eat right. Patrice motioned us back into the room. She laid down the draft agreement, marking the signature lines. You have 20 minutes. Candace bowed her head, pen hovering at the edge of the page like someone hesitating at a church door. Marcus whispered to his lawyer. The air thickened like wet plaster. In my kitchen, before I turn off the stove, I always taste one last time. If the flavor's right, I serve. If not, a pinch more salt. Here, before the pen touches paper, I taste too. Truth and comfort have different flavors. Truth burns the throat, but warms the belly. Comfort slides down smooth, but chills you later. Will they sign or dig in to the end? And if they sign, will the number come with an apology or just a hollow check? Remember my blue ink pen, the anchor just deep enough. In a moment, that anchor will touch paper. Stay with me. 5 more lines and you'll hear a brick house exhale. When we returned, the gray-haired lawyer slid the draft toward us. My clients agree to void the deed, repay all withdrawn funds with interest and fees as stated, and commit to non-interference. However, the public apology, my client proposes to phrase it as regrets for any misunderstanding or inconvenience. Patrice looked at me. I looked at Candace. You know this wasn't misunderstanding. It was forgery. Court isn't a kitchen where you pretend you oversalted. Candace bit her lip. A streak of lipstick faded. She lowered her gaze and exhaled. Fine. A public apology, Marcus protested. Candace! Be quiet, she whispered, not looking at him. Patrice noted the change, rewriting. Apology statement. I, Candace Miller, publicly apologize to Mrs. Amelia Maver for participating in a wrongful documentation process resulting in the violation of her ownership rights. I pledge never to repeat such conduct. The gray-haired lawyer sighed and initialed. Content agreed. One last matter. Patrice turned to Marcus. You're not family. You'll sign to withdraw from all transactions and accept joint civil liability. The criminal part. Let the prosecutor handle. Marcus raised an eyebrow, smile gone cold. I will not sign. Patrice stayed calm. That's fine. The court has already noted criminal elements. We'll see you in interrogation. Marcus leaned back, proving the chair was indeed comfortable. 11:49 a.m. Courtroom. The judge reviewed the draft, asking each clause, Deed annulment? Agreed. Full reimbursement? Agreed. Non-interference pledge? Agreed. Public apology? Agreed. He looked up, eyes shifting from Candace to me. Mrs. Amelia, any further request? I stood, hand resting on my cane. 1. That the court order any future modifications to my property records valid only if I appear in person before a certified notary, with the session video recorded. The judge's smile was faint, approving. Wise. He nodded to the clerk. Enter it. He wrote, The court hereby nullifies the fraudulent quitclaim deed, restores ownership title to Amelia Maver, orders full reimbursement of funds, interest, and costs within 30 days, records the public apology of Candace Miller, and prohibits future interference with said property. Related materials are referred to the county prosecutor for review of potential criminal liability, including that of Marcus Vance. The gavel struck once, clean, sharp, like a knot severed by a single blade. Candace turned toward me, eyes wet but tearless. She breathed out, I'm sorry. It wasn't a pretty sentence, but it was real. Marcus strode out fast, as if afraid the wind might slip through his seams. In the hall, Darius waited, hands clasped before him. Mom, don't, I said. You've got work to do, not words. File your statement, then work. Every dollar, every act. Clean. Patrice squeezed my hand. Civil part's done. Criminal will take its course. Let's go home. We crossed the parking lot under a rare, clear Detroit sky. I opened the car door, sat, and laid my blue ink pen across my lap like a small bird that had flown back to rest. In the rearview mirror, the courthouse receded. Somewhere, I heard seashell chimes. No, memories echo. The house was calling. That afternoon, I stepped onto the brick porch. The teal-blue door creaked open in its familiar note. I went straight to the kitchen, flicked the kettle on. When the water boiled, I poured it over cinnamon tea. The old wooden table trembled slightly, like an old friend laughing through its throat. I'm home, I whispered. My friend, we're staying. Sunlight spread across the red geraniums on the sill. I folded the court order, slipped it into my black notebook. On the first page, written in blue ink, my name has returned to where it belongs. 3 weeks after the trial, Detroit had changed seasons. The early winter wind tapped gently on the teal doorframe, like an old friend coming to visit. On my kitchen table lay a transfer receipt. Candace had repaid $136,000 in full, as ordered by the court, along with a short handwritten apology. The letters were neat and straight. An apology can't mend a broken maple branch, but it can tie the trellis back together. Marcus Vance's case was referred to the county prosecutor. I didn't follow the details. Justice moves at its own rhythm. I only know that he had to sit in an interrogation room, and that charming smile of his didn't survive the session. Darius stayed with me for a while. In the mornings, he changed the curtains, fixed the stair rail, and repaired the porch steps. In the afternoons, he attended debt counseling sessions at the church hall on Grand River Avenue. At night, he took family finance classes at the credit union. Some nights, he left a brown envelope on the table. Ma, this month's interest, my share. I didn't count. I just said, write it down. Every dollar. You're rewriting your name. Rumors travel fast. Mrs. Ruthie from next door brought over a stack of notarized deeds. Can you check this quitclaim from when my husband passed? Mr. Henderson showed up with a rusty tin box. Kept our papers here for decades. Mice ate the corner. My kitchen became a way station for people afraid of losing their names off their own houses. I called Patrice Coleman. "Kid, let's make something useful." "Something that helps more than just me," Patrice laughed. "I've been waiting for you to say that." We knocked on the doors of the Register of Deeds, the credit union, and the church. I told my story, not polished, not softened. "Old folks don't need pity," I said. "They need tools." And so an idea took form. Saturday morning, the church hall opened early. A whiteboard stood at the entrance, written in blue marker. "Safe home. Free deed check day." Patrice handled the legal advice table. Mrs. Alvarez from the Register of Deeds checked title chains on the spot. Mr. Green from the bank taught how to lock account changes and register emergency contacts. Darius handed out flyers, 10 signs of deed fraud, and registered seniors for free financial classes. I wore a cloth badge. Amelia, host. Not to be in charge, but so anyone walking in would know, this is home. An elderly lady with a cane handed me an old notarized form. I put on my glasses. "Keep this safe. From now on, do 2 things. 1, scan the stamped copy. 2, store it in a fireproof box. No more tins for mice to chew." She smiled like she'd just learned a new song. A retired veteran said quietly, "They offered me a reverse mortgage." Sounded like a pension. I poured him tea and asked 3 questions. Is there a prepayment penalty? Is the interest fixed or adjustable? And when you transfer the name, who keeps the key? He froze. I nodded. "Your name is the key." I remembered the day I opened that thick envelope. If I had stayed silent one more month, the house might have slipped away. So I gave the community 3 keys. Read every letter about your deed immediately. Match dates and times with your own calendar. Compare every signature with the sample at your bank. When seniors in the neighborhood start holding their pens like anchors, what doors might open for them? Can a 70-year-old build a strong enough anchor to make a thief stop at the doorstep? Keep in mind that whiteboard, that blue marker, that little fireproof box. They're bricks of a foundation. One more heartbeat, and I'd announce a fund born right from this brick kitchen. Stay with me. Soon the wind chime will ring as the ribbon is cut. By noon, the church hall was warm as a giant kitchen. Patrice clapped her hands for attention. I took the microphone, hands trembling slightly. From age, not fear. "My name is Amelia Maver. I'm an old woman who almost lost her home because of a piece of paper. Today, I ask you to help me protect yours. We're creating the Safe Home, Safe Name Fund." Behind me hung a board with 7 clear goals. Monthly free deed check days at churches and libraries. A scam alert hotline directly connected to the Register of Deeds. Verified notary days. Cross-checked licensed notaries only. Fireproof document lockers for low-income seniors. Family finance classes with the credit union. Read contracts, understand fees, track interest. Signature kits. 1 sample stored at the bank, another sealed at home. Companion volunteers. Young helpers who read mail and fill forms, but never sign for you. Applause filled the room like warmth. Mrs. Alvarez promised Register of Deeds coordinators would attend every event. Mr. Green donated 10 fireproof lockers. Mr. Henderson joked, "I'll add 2 of mine from the basement. No mice there." Laughter rolled through the hall like sunlight. Darius took the mic. "My name is Darius Maver. I made a big mistake. I'm volunteering a full year for this fund. Twice a week, I'll drive seniors to the notary and to the Register of Deeds. I'll log every trip, every document." The applause this time wasn't for instant forgiveness. It was for direction. By evening, I stood at the door watching the last people leave with their new fireproof boxes. The Detroit air was cold but clear. At home, the wind chime of seashells tinkled on the porch. In my kitchen, I placed the fund's first sample document box on the shelf and labeled it in blue ink. Signature sample, Amelia. Next to it lay the laminated court order and a small handwritten note. 3 keys, read mail, match dates, compare signatures. That night, Darius washed dishes while I dried. He asked softly, "Mom, do you forgive me?" I put the last plate in its place. Forgiveness is like a season. You can't rush it. Let's tend the garden first. He nodded. Water dripped from his hands into the sink like the first rain of winter. 1 year later, Detroit bloomed into spring. Red geraniums filled my windowsill. The Safe Home, Safe Name Fund had hosted 13 deed check days, helped 38 people find irregularities, stopped 9 suspicious title transfers, and provided 30 fireproof lockers. The Register of Deeds introduced senior alert flags. Any title change for someone over 65 now triggered direct verification required. The credit union launched regular classes called Understand Your Contract in 90 Minutes. Candace kept her word. She never reappeared in my life except for a brief Easter greeting. Marcus faced prosecution. I wished no harm, only that justice walk its proper pace. Darius completed his year of service, holding the certificate like a ticket home. He'd finished paying his debt, moved into a small apartment near Rosedale Park, and every evening drove me for a walk around Belle Isle. One night he said, "Mom, I want to start a class. Men reading contracts." I laughed. "Do it." Men need anchors too. On the fund's first anniversary, a new banner hung in the church hall. Safe Home, Safe Name, a name back in its place. I read it aloud, hearing the rhythm echo in my chest like a judge's steady gavel. That evening, I poured cinnamon tea and placed my blue fountain pen on the black notebook. My hand no longer trembled. The brown brick house creaked softly, the sound of dry wood meeting warmth. I smiled, gazing out the window. The young leaves shone pale green, like a promise. If you hear this story and see yourself somewhere in it, remember, a home is not just brick and wood. A home is where your name stays in its rightful place. Read your mail, check the dates, compare the signatures, and when needed, let people like us stand beside you. I am Amelia Maver. I almost lost my home because of one piece of paper. I reclaimed it with those same pieces of paper. And today, as the seashell wind chime rings softly on my porch, I know we are home. Let's end here. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to Margaret Stories, hit the bell for new episodes, like and comment. What's the first red flag that tells you there's trouble with money assets? See you in the next episode, where one small piece of paper might save an entire home.